Hi, everybody. How are you doing? I'm Dr. Gail, and this is Barbara Lamb. Thanks for joining us, Barbara. And
Yes.
your list of things that you do just go on forever and ever. And I'm just going to hit the first topics of it is that you're a world famous ET regression therapist, which there's not a lot of you around. Do you have any idea how many ET regression therapists there are in the U.S.?
Well, I only know of about 4 of us.
Four.
There may be more, but I only know of about 4 of us.
Okay.
3, actually, 3 in this country. Yeah, 1 in Australia too.
Oh, okay. Okay. She's also a researcher, ET experiencer. She's an author of several books. Anyway, those are just a few highlights. We could go on forever and ever and ever. We're going to be talking about crop circles today, and you're an expert in that also. But let me say hello to who is in the chat first before we get started. Is that you on your side? On that noise? Is that me?
No, unfortunately, when text messages come
Oh,
in on
okay.
my phone, they register on my computer. I don't know why. It just started happening that way recently.
Yeah, sometimes something will come through on mine and when it shouldn't. Hey, Teresa. Hey, Mandy May. Let's see who else is there. As we heal each other by Pirouette White. Thanks for joining us today. Hey, Vivienne. Hey, Susie007. Hey, Mara. Hey, Amanda Carroll. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Faye Cole. Hey, Tina. Hey, Janie. Let's see who else is. Hey, Juno. I hope you're feeling better, Juno. Let's see who else is here. Thanks everybody for joining us. Hey, Chris MK. Hey, Dream Journey One. Who else? Hey, Emmy J. Hey, Nancy. Hey, Cat Mama Meows. Do drop in. Hey, Isabel. Hey, Old Painter. How you doing? Hey, Son of What? You've been quiet here lately, Son of What. I'm getting a little bit worried about you, but I guess you're doing okay. Hey, Hypnicity. Let's see who else is here. Hey, Patty. Let's see. Hey, everybody. Hey, Carolyn. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And again, we're here with Barbara Lamb, an expert and world famous ET regression therapist, in which she just told me hey, Kathleen, there's only 3 in the U.S. that she knows of and 1 in Australia, which I didn't know that. So I didn't know if y'all had like a big convention that y'all went to, but apparently if there's only 3 of you, there's no big convention.
That I know of. There may be more whom I don't know of.
Probably, well, how long have you been doing it?
Oh, I've been doing, I've been doing regression therapy work since 1984. And for a few years, it was mostly involving past life regression therapy. And then in 1991, people started coming for having regressions to their extraterrestrial experiences, or in many cases, very weird experiences that had happened to them, and they didn't know what they were. And we found out in regression that they were being visited by these unusual beings from our point of view, from other planets. So I've been doing that work and still am very actively doing that since 1991.
Oh, that's just fascinating. So it looks like to me there needs to be a little more in that field because more and more people are needing help in the ET experiences. So,
Yes.
you at one time did teach classes, didn't you, for this?
Oh, I have taught various classes here and there for colleges and community colleges. Right. I mean, that's just once in a while I'll teach a series.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into crop circles.
Okay.
You seem to be an expert in crop circles. You've been all involved in it. I know very little. I mean, I know what they are, kind of thing, but I don't know the details, and I don't even know when and where crop circles started. Do you have any idea? I mean, do we just wake up in the morning and there they were, or was there a progression of that?
Well, most of the crop circles have been happening in England. And I think the phenomenon began to be really noticed in England. So in the 1970s, occasionally somebody would notice a swirled circle in the wheat crops, one of the other growing crops. And then in the early 1980s, occasionally there would be a circle swirled into the crop. And a man named Colin Andrews, a British electrician person, um, he happened to notice on the way home from work that he looked down a hill to the side of the road, and he noticed that there was this beautiful, it's seemingly perfect circle swirled in the wheat. And he'd seen a couple of those in earlier years, but didn't think too much of them. But this one really caught his eye, and he went down and investigated it, walked into it, and walked around it. He noticed there were no footprints in the growing crop around this. It was just a perfect circle, perfectly laid down in that particular growing crop. And he started putting a lot of interest into that. And there was a young pilot named Busty Taylor who had his own little airplane. And he had been noticing occasionally that looking down at the fields he was flying over, that there was a beautiful, perfect circle seemingly swirled in the crop. So he was interested too. And the two of them met up, and Colin Andrews started flying with Busty Taylor. And because they were both very interested in this phenomenon. I mean, where are these circles coming from and who's doing them? Anyway, the more attention that these two men and a few others were giving to what they eventually called crop circles.
Did those two they named it then crop circles? I mean, that's obvious.
Yes, well, actually, being English, the English people call their crops, they call them corn, even if they're not the corn vegetable crop.
Uh-huh.
So that I think that they began calling them corn circles.
Okay.
And as that news about that spread to United States and other countries, we began to call them crop circles. So anyway, through the 1980s, the more that people were paying attention to these patterns laid down in the fields and the crops, the more that it seemed to be responded to. In other words, the more attention people gave, the more crop circles were made, and the more elaborate they were made. I mean, into really recognizable patterns. For instance, Colin Andrews and Busty Taylor in one of their little airplane flights, with nobody else there hearing this, and no radio communication going on or anything. They just said in their conversation, we've seen lots of one circle and then maybe a ring around it. And wouldn't it be interesting if we could see a little bit more like a cross line in it, which would mean it would look like a Celtic cross. So they just had that conversation in the airplane. And lo and behold, that night, a crop circle was laid down with that particular pattern that they had talked about, a Celtic cross pattern. And so they especially paid attention, like, whoa, there's something conscious somehow that's
listening to us,
aware of our conversations and our wish. And because it seems to be that something is responding in terms of making a crop circle. So that got more people's attention. I didn't hear about it until 1990. And I heard about it because I was at a big lecture forum called the Whole Life Expo. And they had many, many speakers on many subjects. And I saw in the program guide that instead of the speaker's photo, with all the other ones, it was done that way, all the other speakers. But for this particular lecture, it just showed a funny little pattern. And I thought, whoa, what's that? It's not a person's photo. And I read the title of the lecture, which hadn't quite happened yet, luckily. So I was still able to go to it. And the title of the lecture was something like Mysterious Patterns in the Fields of Britain. And immediately I just had this big flash of light exploding in me, like, oh, we're being communicated from out there, from beings out there. That was my immediate, very powerful first hit on that. So I went to the lecture, saw videos and photos of the 1990 summer season of crop circles in England. And halfway through the lecture, I found myself slapping my thigh and saying to myself, oh, that's it. I'm going to England next summer to check that out, which I did, 1991 summer. And I just became fascinated with it, went into several, about 7, I think, crop circles, and happened to meet by lots of synchronicity. I think it was really guided to be at the right place and the right time, meet the right people. So I
Well,
met the
seems like
very,
it's synchronicity. That's when you started your ET regression also.
it
Right?
was the same year, the same, what a year that was.
Yeah.
1991. My first experiencers, about 5 of them, and really launching into that work. And then being in my first crop circles and becoming very dedicated to that research as well. So for 25 years in a row, I went to England for crop circles every summer, and I've been in a couple of thousand of them. And with each one, I really spent time in them too. Usually I'd sit down and meditate in them, and I would be measuring the energies. Each one has more energy in it than is in the rest of the field that the crop circle appears in. And so I would measure with my dowsing rods. And very often I would have a friend with me who would be using a pendulum. So
Mhm.
what would happen is that we'd be walking along the tractor track to get into the crop circle. Usually the crop circles were way out in the middle of a big field. And the dowsing rods and the pendulum would just stay perfectly motionless. But as soon as we would step into the crop circle, even just 1 inch into the crop circle, my dowsing rods would open up and my friend's pendulums would start swinging around. And at the most energized portions of each crop circle, which was usually a big swirl if it was in the middle of the crop circle, um, my dowsing rods would have gone all the way around in a circle, except that my body was in the way.
Now, when did you feel the energy of the crop circle before you entered it, or was
No,
it just like when you entered, like when your dowsing rods went? I mean, were you feeling it
yeah,
that time?
only right in the crop circle. And we tested it many, many times, many crop circles that, um, there'd be no reaction on the dowsing rod or the pendulum
Mhm.
right up until the moment of stepping into the crop circle. And we would test it coming out again. In other words, if these were way open
Mhm.
in the crop circle, when we step out again of the crop circle into the tram line, they would just close up again.
Well, I'm talking about you energetically. Did you feel the crop circles as you were approaching, or was it the same as you didn't feel anything until you walked in either?
Yeah. So I developed a sensitivity also with my hands, and with my whole body, but especially with my hands. And so I didn't feel anything different until actually being in the crop circle.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very specific.
Yeah.
The energy and the patterns. I can show you some pictures if you'd like. It's very, very specific that the energy is confined within the crop circle pattern. Yeah. Anyway, it's been a fascinating thing to visit them. Now, I must say right away that I'm talking about the genuine crop circles, and that is not man-made ones. And I distinguish this because there really are some man-made crop circles. I think every summer, I don't know in the earliest years, but certainly since about 1991, we know that there have been small groups of men or a couple of men who would go out in the middle of the night and they would take boards on a rope that would go around the head. We call them stomping boards or garden rollers or something like that, and press down the crops into a crop circle.
Did you
But
see,
those man-made ones, yes, I've been in many of those too. The man-made ones have no extra energy whatsoever. And because the plants are forced over, they break, right where they come out of the ground. And so they lose their connection with their own roots. And then, so those plants, those stalks, die right away. So when you go in, even a few hours later, into a man-made crop circle, oh, they just look so lifeless. And they are. They are lifeless. They don't grow anymore. They're just killed, basically.
right,
And that's in comparison to the genuine crop circles that when they come up out of the ground, they're just bent over at ground level. We call it a magical bend, bent but not broken. And those plants just keep growing right along the ground and ripening and coming to full maturity. And there have been tests done by some of the English researchers where they have planted seeds from the laid over plants in a genuine crop circle. And those plants have been tested for 8 years in a row, taking the seeds from each generation and planting it for the next season. And those plants have been consistently growing faster, stronger, sturdier, taller, higher than comparison plants that were not in a genuine crop circle,
so
even
in
compared to plants in the same field
yeah. So
with
in
a crop
the
circle.
crop circle, does the grass ever grow back straight, or are they permanently bent over?
Well, what happens is that the harvesting of these fields goes on in usually about mid-August on through August and into September. And then the land, the plants and everything are mulched and turned over, tilled,
Right.
and then laid like that fallow for a few months. And then in the winter months, the new crop is planted there. But a very interesting thing is that let's say a crop circle happened in a wheat field on one year, and then if the field was harvested right over where the crop circle is, and then the ground was tilled, turned over, and then a few months later in the winter, let's say a barley crop was planted in that field. It had been a wheat plant, or it might be another wheat plant, or it might be alfalfa or flax or oats or whatever. But no matter what the next year's crop is, the energy from the original crop circle the previous year in some fields, that energy, the pattern, in other words, will show up through the
Really?
new crop. And that can be seen when flying over in an airplane or a little helicopter, or now they have drones that fly over and take videos, which is really wonderful. So sometimes you can see in a field that has no crop circle in it on a given year, but you can see we call the ghost or the shadow of the previous year's crop circle showing up through the crop. Looks sort of like a darker pattern that you can really see looking down through this year's crop. So that means, I think, that the energy from that original crop circle has remained in the field in that pattern, with subsequent crops that are planted in that. So there's really something going on there. And that does not happen with the man-made crop circles
Right.
because there's no extra energy there. So it's been a really wonderful adventure, and so many good people from other countries too have been involved in this phenomenon
Well, how
going.
many crop
Yeah.
circles are there? How many large crop circles do you know of?
Well, by now there must be, I would say, between 3 and 4,000 in England alone, but
Mhm.
they've been known to appear in other countries as well. Um, some of the European countries and even China and Korea has had a marvelous one several years ago, really complex, beautiful pattern. They've been in South America, they've been in Australia, they've probably been in most countries, including, by the way, United States. That we've had a number of crop circles in states like Oregon, Northern California, even Southern California, where I am, um, and Washington State, Montana, Idaho, all along that northern border of United States, and then in the South too. Kentucky has had a couple of them, and Tennessee, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and kind of up and down the eastern seaboard. And of course, in states like Kansas and Nebraska, which are wonderful, big wheat growing states. So we have had our share, um, but still not as many. And I think, in my opinion, not as complex as the ones that happen every year in England.
Oh, wow.
And people wonder, a lot of people ask me, why England? Why do they happen mostly there? Well, there are theories. Nobody absolutely knows for sure. But one of the main theories is that England has a lot of water under the surface. It rains there a lot. It has a high water table, has a lot of underground streams and underground rivers. And the area where most of the crop circles have been happening in England is an area where under the surface of the soil, there's a geological aquifer, like a big lake
Really?
of, yeah, that's under the surface of the soil. So one of the theories about how a crop circle is made, and that ties into the underground water, is that there is a vortex of energy that comes down. In some theories, it's coming down from the higher atmosphere. And when it comes to the earth, when it reaches the earth in a crop, it seems to draw up the moisture from that underground water source, creating a steam effect. And this is very important because when the plants are steamed, they can bend over without any breaking, just like you could take wood, wood
Right.
carpenters, when they're bending wood to make something, uh,
Archie.
they steam it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they steam it so that it's pliable. It's the same thing with the plants, so they're not harmed at all. They're just bent over, laid down by the ground, and as I said, keep growing and ripening, coming to full maturity. Yeah, so anyway, that's one of the main theories. There are some people who have the theory that the crop circles are somehow pulled down from the earth itself, from Gaia, into these patterns. I personally do not favor that particular point of view. I respect it, but I think that they're coming from above, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would find that one a little harder to believe also, coming from Gaia.
Right. I mean, I think Gaia is wonderful. Gaia has consciousness, and maybe they can do this, but just again, it's just my opinion that they are not coming from that particular direction or from that source.
Now, have you done, you have a book on this, right?
Pardon me?
Do you have a book on crop circles?
I do, yes. Crop circles revealed.
Yes. Okay. And any videos or YouTube things on the crop circles?
Well, I have some photographs here, some
Okay.
color photos that I would like to show. The first one I'm going to show happened in 1991 when I was right there in England. And this particular one, it's referred to as the Barbary Castle crop circle, although there have been, over the years, have been other crop circles in that area, in that that field even. So this is, whoops,
Now, this is in where again?
this is in England, Wiltshire County, England.
Is this
And
the first one you went to?
no, it's not the first one I went to, but it was in that first year. Now, that was a pretty complex pattern.
Yeah.
And that particular crop circle is the one that brought more people into being interested in the crop circles because people recognize, wow, this is a geometric structure of
Yeah. That's pretty amazing.
some complexity. And there have been lots of interpretations of that crop circle too. But anyway, it's a beautiful geometric form, and and that happened in 1991. So people began to be, extremely interested in that. And then I would like to point out that the crop circles began to be much longer as of 1990 and
I didn't know
1990
that.
particularly. And
Oh, wow. That's
this
amazing.
one is about 1,200 feet long with lots of different design elements. And there's a mysterious thing that happens too, often other anomalies that happen. For instance, when that long one that I just showed you appeared in the field in the middle of one night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, the people in that area um, were amazed and suddenly they heard that the church bells in the local church were just clanging and ringing like mad, as if something was happening. And some people even ran out of their houses to say, what's the matter? I mean, do we have a fire or something? They didn't see anything happening, although a couple of people witnessed that out in that particular field where that one happened, there were a couple of circular forms like orbs of red light flying around just over the crop. It looked like very close to the ground. So maybe that had something to do with it too.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun. Anyway, as the years went on, we began to get more and more geometric forms, including fractals. Now, I must say that I had never even heard of fractals. I learned so much from crop circles because of these patterns. So in 1996,
Oh, wow. Oh, that's beautiful. Look at
showing
that.
up,
Yeah.
and it is a Julius of fractal geometry.
Mhm.
And so this was the first one of the fractal patterns. No, I must correct myself. In 1991, there was a fractal pattern called the Mandelbrot set, and I don't have a picture handy to show you of that one. But then in 1996, this one that I just showed you, the Julia set, that was the beginning of a series of crop circles that showed that kind of a spiraling fractal pattern. And so here is another one
Yeah.
with 3 arms, not just one spiraling arm, but 3 arms.
Mm-hmm.
And that was absolutely amazing to us. And then over the years, the patterns continued to become sometimes that same theme of the fractals, the Julia sets. And then finally in 2001, this one happened.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sitting there going, is that the starfish? But it's more arms than that.
So this one was had 800 and more than 800 crop circles in it, and it was over 400 feet in diameter, and it was absolutely beautifully done on top of a hill, and that the hilltop looks from a distance looks to be flat. But when you actually get up into it and walk around in it, you realize it has dips and hollows. It's really not even and flat. And yet, this beautiful pattern was perfect. In other words, the uneven ground didn't seem to make any difference
Mm-hmm.
to the making of a crop circle, laying it down in a perfect pattern. And there's kind of an interesting story about that one, too, that the particular middle of the night, when that crop circle was laid down, it was a very stormy night, stormy and windy, and just a big old storm. And there was a man in a tent camping near the top of that hill where it just began to flatten out a little bit. And it was so windy and stormy that he didn't even open his flat or look out the little window or anything. He didn't see anything going on. But in the morning, when the storm had calmed down, he went out of his tent and started walking around the top of that field. And he noticed this beautiful crop circle there. And he very carefully to make sure there were no muddy footprints. In other words, no people could have made that, or they they would have left muddy footprints. Excuse me. So it was absolutely perfect, and no sign whatsoever of anybody having been up there. So you see, those of us who are very interested in this phenomenon just love incidents like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
there's so much lore, so many stories going around about some of these crop circles because there's so many mysterious aspects to them. And that certainly is a big part of the fascination for me is how could this possibly be? I mean, these are big patterns, 1,200 feet long, that one I showed you, 800 feet diameter of
That's
the
just
one that
amazing.
I just showed you. Yeah, and so now there's another aspect that I think is extremely interesting, and that is that um, people sometimes wish for a certain pattern to be made, and they will kind of talk about it, or in some cases, a group will meditate about it. And then that night, I mean, it's very responsive, this consciousness, this phenomenon. And that very night, they'll notice a crop circle with that pattern will be laid down in the field. So here's an example of one of those.
Wow.
Trouble is when I
Those are
hold up
just
the
all gorgeous.
picture, I can't see the screen, but does that look like that's fairly
Yeah,
centered?
just lift it up just a little bit more. Oh, there you go. You got it. That's good.
Good.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
beautiful.
so that is a Japanese pattern, like Japanese origami. Now, the story behind this is that there was a group of people from Japan who were visiting England that particular year, and they were sitting up on wonderful Silbury Hill, which is very known in that area, an ancient megalithic man-made hill, perfectly conical shaped. Anyway, they were sitting up there meditating one afternoon and asking for the crop circle makers, whoever or whatever they are, uh, to please make a pattern that is shows something from the Japanese culture. They didn't specify, but just something that would be from the Japanese culture. And then that night, that crop circle that I just showed you
Yeah.
uh, came down in the field. And that was a beautiful example of Japanese origami. So the same group stayed around for a while, and they had another meditation and to another crop circle and asked for another depiction from Japanese culture. And then this came up.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
And this is a Japanese symbol.
It's beautiful.
And this symbol in Japan, we were told, represents women, a symbol
Oh,
for women. Now, those of us from the United States tended to think of this pattern as being dolphins
that's what I see. And in fact, in
interacting.
many of these crop circles, I'm seeing water animals or things.
Yes, yes. So we don't know. I mean, that's one of these things about it is that anybody can project
Right.
anything onto the patterns that they want to, or see anything in the patterns that they want to. So, um, it makes it very interesting to see what other people think of the patterns, as well as having our own takes
Well,
on
we've
them.
got people asking a lot of questions. You ready to take some?
Yes, certainly.
All right. I've just seen Susie back there starring them. Okay, here's Teresa Ford. Does the plant that was bent return to upright or stay bent on the crop circles?
Oh, no, they that's a good question. No, they just when they're laid over, either in this natural way, or even in the man-made way, they just remain where they are. Now, there's one exception to that, however, and that is when a crop circle is laid down in a brand new crop, like in the month of May or so, when it's very green. The plants are actually green and they turn brown as the season goes on. But that when they're laid down in a brand new, fresh, green, young crop, they will start to come up a little bit, not all the way up.
Mm-hmm.
They come up sometimes just a little bit or a little bit more, and then they just remain there.
Okay.
Uh, but normally if they're laid down later in the season, when the crop is not so green and young, they'll just stay there until. Oh, and then even when they're harvested, the laid down grains remain laid down, and all the standing crops around that crop circle get cut off, get harvested like a butch haircut. It reminds me of. But even then, you can go out into the field and go into the crop circle because the crop circle is still laid down. And it just means that you walk past all the little cut off stalks of the remaining wheat. And then, but you can see the difference between the standing ones and the swirled, laid down ones. So that's nice. And the energy is still there as well. And you can see them still from the air, but not quite as distinctly because the surrounding crops are not so big and tall, having
Right.
cut off. But still, if you look carefully from a little airplane or something, you can see that, oh, there's the crop circle. It's still there until, all the tilling
Right.
goes on in the fall.
Right.
Right.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next question. This is Teresa. Are they usually in wheat fields or are they in other crops too? Anyone know?
Okay. A lot of them are in wheat crops. It seems to be the main crop that crop circles appear in, but they can happen and do happen in barley crops, in oat crops, in oilseed canola crops, which are bright yellow,
Really?
very bright yellow in the spring with dark green stalks. And those are remarkable crop circles because those stalks are about as thick as your pointer finger. And they're stiff, they're strong. So for those to be bent over with the yellow blossoms all along the way and at the end, um, that's an amazing thing that they can be bent over without breaking.
Wow.
Because normally, if we and I've tried this a number of times, going into a canola field and taking one of those stalks and trying to bend it over, well, it snaps, just like if you were to break fresh celery,
Mhm.
with kind of the ends sticking out. Yeah, not even an even break. But the fact that they are very often laid down into these beautiful patterns and made into different shapes, perfect shapes. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And another thing that is amazing too is that the corn crops, they call them maize in England, but we call it corn. And corn plants can grow up to be 11 and 12 feet tall, each plant, and then lots and lots of leaves and a good, hefty, thick stalk
Yeah.
supporting all these leaves and the corn cobs growing on those plants. And yet, in September of a few of the years, the corn plants have been bent over and again not broken and even swirled into beautiful patterns. How that can happen, I absolutely don't know. I mean, that is really astonishing.
Yeah.
So
That
with both of those, but now with wheat and barley and oats, those plants, they, they're very thin stalks, very pliable. You can see them blowing in the wind. Wheat crops and the barley crops are just beautiful, really like a whole field swaying in the breezes. It's just beautiful. And and you can understand how they could be bent over and not cracked or broken. But with the corn and the oilseed canola plants, I just don't know how that could possibly be accomplished, and yet it is.
yeah.
That's part of the mystery. There's so many mysteries about this phenomenon, and that's one of the appealing aspects, and also that you can actually go in them and experience them and lie down in them and feel the energies and meditate in them and meet wonderful people in them.
Okay. You ready for another question?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Next. Hey, Gino. I wonder if elementals interact with the crop circles. Well, that's a good question. Do you already think
Oh, that is a good question. I don't really have a knowledgeable answer to that question, but I would certainly think that that is true, that the elementals, I mean, anyone who understands that elementals do exist and they're here on Earth in our growing substances, our plants, our woods, our grasses, our fields. So I would certainly think that they have a part in it. With the crop circles, I don't think that they make the crop circles, in my opinion, but I think that they're in that land where crop circles happen, and probably they check it out. They may be there. They may have even been there when I'm there, and I haven't even been aware of it.
This is what I see. It's the ETs that are doing the crop circles, but they're like the like of the airports, the ones with the lights, right here, right here. That's what I see the elementals.
Right.
Yeah, and they do communicate with each other because that's what I see them doing. So there is a collaboration there apparently, and but I do see, because I know they have communication, the ETs and the elementals, because of the connection from the stars to the trees and having to have them aligned. Their communication is that way. So
Uh-huh.
that's how I see them, as the elementals are directing the ETs of where they need to go. So,
Maybe they do. I would not be surprised. Anyways, thank you to the elementals if
yes.
you are having a part in that, which you may very well be having. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next question. Okay, White Dragon. Barbara, there are videos on these crop circles being made.
Ah, yes. There's one in 1996, and I will show you a picture of it. I don't have the video of it.
There's a video on that one.
Can you see it? Yes,
Yeah,
this
great.
in 1996. And what was seen in the video, that there are two orbs of light, white orbs, that come from the far end of the field, and they're circling around. And as they're circling around, you can see one in the center swirling around, and these spokes. This is hard to do.
Yeah.
The spokes are coming out to that first circle on each one, and those two white orbs just come quickly over the field and then around the other side of that hedge at the end of the field, and then immediately two more, or maybe it's the same two, we don't know, two more white orbs come and circle right over that pattern that's already beginning, and then the spokes come further out with another circle on the end, and then they go behind the hedge. So that whole process takes only 7 seconds to make that whole crop circle. And it is a perfect crop circle. And investigators who went into that swear that it's one of the genuine crop circles, not man-made. You know, it had the full range of energy and perfection and unbroken plants, and so we think that that was actually a depiction of that crop circle being made. So crop circles have been seen, as with that one, made by orbs of light. And orbs of light have also been videotaped as they are visiting a crop circle that was just made a few hours earlier. And a crop circle was made back in 1990. Um, a young man was up on a hill looking down at a wheat field, and he saw an orb of light cruising down at the bottom of the hill in the wheat crop. This orb, white orb, just cruising along right above the crop, and every once in a while it would dip down in the crop for a second or two and then come up, go a little further, dip down in it. So we have been wondering if maybe that orb was kind of like a little scout of checking out the field for where it would be appropriate to make the crop circles. So that might have been detecting that underground water that I have talked about, and that would be a good place with the underground moisture, good place for the crop circle to appear. And then later that particular night, when that video had been taken, there was a new crop circle there in the field.
Well, that's probably a great video. So there you
Yeah.
go, dragon. All right.
Oh, and by the way, I think it's really cute that when that video was taken, it was late one afternoon, and there was a farmer man in that field, uh, riding along in a little tractor-like contraption, and it was years later that he finally said that on that particular night in 1991, that he had seen this ball of light going right past him, driving along on his little tractor, and he had no idea what it was, and he didn't even mention it to anybody because he thought everybody would think he's crazy.
Of course.
Talk about, he was one of those guys who would go to the pub every night,
Yeah.
country pub, and talk to his friends, and he never even mentioned that because he thought they'd think he'd gone bonkers. But then when he realized it was okay to talk about orbs years later, he came forth and said, "Well, I was the one who was witnessing that. It went whizzing right by my head." And then he saw it dip down into the ground and come up and then go further and dip down into the ground.
That would
So
be amazing.
probably the same one.
Right. Probably.
You
Okay.
know, crop circles are still happening, and a very good reference would be to go to the website called the Crop Circle Connector.com, and they have for anybody to see the current year's crop circles. So there are crop circles appearing right now, and probably,
Here in the US or in England?
well, both, but especially I'm thinking in England. Anyway, this is definitely crop circle season in England for another month at least, and then the harvesting happens, and some are still made, but they're not going to last very long because the harvesting will happen. So I always felt that the best time to go to England for crop circles was from mid-July to mid-August,
Okay.
or even a couple of weeks on either side of that. But usually by mid-August, the not the corn plant, but the other plants are usually being harvested, and it's more wonderful if you can visit them when they've got the standing crops around them.
Right.
Yeah,
You ready for another question?
sure.
Okay. Cat Mama Meows, do drop in. Does the steam hurt the animals?
Oh, great. I don't think that the steam hurts the animals, but there have been 3 instances I know where animal life actually was caught in a crop circle being made, and the animals died.
Wow.
Oh, actually, there were 2 incidents, one in England and one in Canada, where, a possum, uh, happened to go wandering through the crop field in each case, and then the crop circle came down, and then it was discovered that the possum was shrunk down to being about an inch thick and completely blackened.
Wow.
So there really must have been a lot of heat
Yeah.
that came down in the making of that crop circle. And then I personally found a bird in a crop circle, and the bird hadn't been all compressed like that, but it was warm. It was a dead bird.
Mhm.
My friend bent over to pick up her sun hat from the floor of the crop circle. And when she picked it up, she saw something a little bit grayish under the top stalks in the crop circle. And she said, "Look, what's that? I wonder what that is." So we pushed back the stalks and pulled out a bird who was still warm. And she went and, to stroke the bird to see if it was alive. And the feathers just slid right out like they do from any kind of bird life. If you want to get rid of the feathers, you heat it and they'll come out. So that bird had been alive until very, very recently. I mean, maybe an hour earlier or so. And this was one of those crop circles we went to very early in the morning, so it had probably not been there terribly long. And so that had happened. So it's not a good idea. I would not want to be in the field with the crop circle being made right where I was, because there seems to be so much heat involved.
Right.
And that kind of supports that theory that it may be a vortex of energy, which is very heated, coming down from above. Now, also, I want to say that there have been other witnessings of crop circles being made, and there are 2 or 3 instances I know of where a witness saw a beam of light coming down from the sky and making a crop circle. And so one was a young man who was riding his bicycle. This was outside of Glastonbury, England, years ago. And he was riding his bicycle around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was still daylight, but not sunny. It was kind of an overcast day. And he noticed that out there in the field to his left, there was a crop circle, a beam of light coming down into the field. And he followed that up with his eyes, and he noticed that there was a round silver disc-shaped craft that beam seemed to be coming from. So that may be one of the ways that they are made. Another man in Holland at night he was looking out the window, and he had a big field out there of growing crop, and he noticed a beam of light coming down, but it was dark out there, completely dark. So the next morning he went out, and sure enough, in that area of the field was a new crop circle. Yeah. And then people have actually heard a crop circle being made. There was a whole team of investigators around, it was 1990, I believe, in England, Wiltshire County, and they had set up cameras and audio recorders and all kinds of equipment, some really good equipment too, professional cameras, and they were all about 20 of them, and they were standing around the edge of a particular field, and they heard from one side of the field kind of an electrostatic chirping sound. They described, they didn't see anything, but they heard the sound coming closer and closer and closer, and it stopped right out in front of where they were and was silent. And then several seconds later, they heard it as it was retreating back in the direction that it had come from. And then a few hours later in daylight, they noticed, whoa, there's a new crop circle right there where it had stopped. And there's another couple of people, man and wife, who were taking a country walk, which a lot of English people do, along the edge of a growing crop field and wheat. And they happened to notice that looking down at the other end of the field, they noticed that the top of the crop in a certain pathway was kind of being riffled over. And then it stopped. They didn't see anything doing it, but it stopped. And then they noticed that the plants in a circular form were being affected in some way because little bits and pieces were flying off the wheat plants. And then it stopped, and the riffling went back the other direction as if the wind had changed and going back the other way. And then they went out into the field. They were curious. Well, my goodness, what's been going on? And this was in the early days too, before people really knew about crop circles. So they went out into that field and noticed that there was a perfectly beautiful swirled circle right there.
Wow.
So what caused that? I mean, no matter how much we learn about certain features, the mystery goes on.
Well, Barbara,
None of it.
we're about at the end of the show.
Okay.
The hour has just flown by, but I would like for you to tell everybody what you do, how they can get in touch with you, and so.
Well, mostly these days I'm doing hypnotic regressions for people for a whole variety of subjects. Many people want to know about any peculiar encounters that may have had, for example, with extraterrestrials. Some people come for a different reason. They want to know why they are here. I mean, what is the main reason that they are here in this lifetime? What is their sole purpose?
I didn't know you did that. I mean, that's
Yes.
sole purpose. I had no idea. So you can regress people back to find out what their sole purpose is.
Yes. And that is wonderful. They really appreciate it. I think it's absolutely wonderful too that people can know that. And I'm very pleased that more and more people are really wondering that.
Right.
I think all the years when I was growing up and in my adult life until, maybe the last 20 or 30 years, I never heard people talk about that. I never heard people wonder about that.
Right.
I wondered about my purpose, but
Right.
Anyway, and I feel like I'm doing my purpose, which is a very blessed, wonderful feeling. And yeah, so a lot of people, more people nowadays are wondering about that. So it could be any kind of question that they are really sincerely wondering about that has some sort of answer to it or some sort of source to it. So mostly the people who are coming to me are wondering about extraterrestrial experiences and including even children. I've been working with a number of children who have been having those experiences with the other beings and want to know more about it. And so my children's book, I'm looking to see, I just don't happen to have one sitting right by me, but my children's book is just in its second edition of being published right now. It's called Kids Adventures with E.T. Friends in Space. We just refer to it as E.T. Friends. That's available on my website for anybody who would be interested. And it's a good book for adults. I've had adult experiencers say, "Oh, I want that book," because it depicts some of the things that they had experienced during their own childhoods. And and also the book can help somebody to remember certain types of things that happen with the other beings in those encounters.
Right.
So it's great.
Thanks, Barbara. You're just always fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
I could just listen to you for hours. You have so much to share. But anyway, thank you. And thanks, Susie. Thanks all the moderators for being here. And we have a show tomorrow again at, I think it's at, oh, there we go. Thank you, Susie. It's tomorrow at 2 o'clock Pacific time, 5 o'clock Eastern time. It's Danielle from Ordinary to Made Ordinary, and we'll be talking about her ET experiences. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you again, Barbara. And we'll see y'all later. All right. Bye-bye.